All right, so in lesson 38, we're going to talk about complex numbers as solutions to the equations. This is going to be a quadratic formula section. So we'll do our opposite of b plus or minus b squared minus 4ac over 2a. But the emphasis this time is going to be on something called the discriminant. Something that's always been there is known as the b squared minus 4ac. And what it's done is designed to tell us what type of solutions that we expect to get in the problem. So we're going to explore that here. They want us to calculate the discriminant for each equation and use the quadratic formula to solve. So we're going to kind of do both at the same time. So when we look at letter A, right, it's written as x squared minus 9. So what we're going to do is we're going to emphasize this as x squared plus 0x and then minus 9. We do that to tell us that our A value is going to be 1, our B value is going to be 0, and our C value is going to be negative 9. So if I plug this in, the opposite of B, well, opposite of B is 0. So we have 0. And then we're going to have plus or minus the square root of B squared. So it's going to be 0 squared minus 4 times 1 times negative 9. And then that's going to be over 2 times 1, which is going to be 2. So when we calculate this, what we end up seeing and finding out is that if I do the part underneath the square root, right, I'll have plus or minus, we don't need the 0. And then 0 squared, which is 0. And then minus 4 times 1 times negative 9 is going to be 36. It's going to be 36. 36. And then you divide that by 2. So this part right here, this number right here, this is considered our discriminant. So write that right there. That's our discriminant. And so that discriminant tells us that this is a positive value, and so we're going to expect 2 real solutions. So when we calculate that, we could see that square root of 36 is 6, so we end up with plus or minus 6 over 2, and our answers are going to be plus or minus 3. So if we get a positive number inside of here, we get 2 very real solutions. Now if we compare that to, say, letter B, right, again, 1 is going to be my A, my B is going to be negative 6, and my C is going to be 9. So this time when we plug it in, we'll end up with the opposite of B, so we write down 6, and then plus or minus, and then the B squared, so you'll have negative 6 squared minus 4 times 1 times 9. And that's going to be over 2 times 1. This time what happens is when I calculate this in here, this is 36 minus 36. You're going to get 6 plus or minus the square root of 0 over 2. So again, same thing. Notice our discriminant this time. We'll make a note. That's our discriminant. Is a 0. So that means there's nothing here. Square root of 0 is 0, so this means nothing. So it's simply just 6 over 2, and you get a 3. So in this case, you ended up with 1 real solution. 1 real solution. So in part A, we had 2 real solutions. That's when we had a positive number here. Here we have a 0, so we end up with only 1 real solution. And so now this is going to take us to letter C, where again we rewrite this just for visualization. We have x squared plus 0x and then plus 9. And so then again we know our 1 is A, our B is going to be 0, and our C is going to be 9. So this time when we complete the quadratic formula, we're going to have 0 plus or minus the square root of 0 squared minus 4 times 1 times 9. and that's going to be over 2 times 1. So this time, underneath the radical, we're going to get a plus or minus the square root of negative 36. Now this time, if you observe, our discriminant right here is negative. So that is going to mean we're going to end up with two non-real or imaginary solutions in this particular piece. So that means when I solve this one, right, the square root of 36 is 6, the square root of negative 1 is I, so you end up with plus or minus 6i over 2. And so that means when we divide that, we're going to end up with plus or minus 3i, which is two imaginary solutions in this given case. So they want to know, how does the value of the discriminant for each equation relate to the number of solutions? So again, if we have a couple of notes here, if we have a positive number under the discriminant, this is going to be two real solutions. If we have a 0 under the radical, then we're going to have one, let's write that as a word, one real solution. And if I have a negative number under the radical, I'm going to have two imaginary solutions. That's more or less what this section is about. It's not that we're solving the quadratic formula any different. We're bringing the realization that the number underneath the square root, that was now called the discriminant, does have meaning, and it does give you an indication of what type of solutions you expect to have. So if we look at this one right here, right, if we rewrite this, we would write this as x squared plus 3x and then plus 7 equals 0, such that we know that a will equal 1, b will equal 3, and c will equal 7. And they want to know, what does the value of the discriminant tell us about the number of solutions, right? So remember, the discriminant is the b squared minus 4ac. So let's see, my b is 3, so 3 squared minus 4 times 1 times 7. And so when we calculate this, this is going to be 9 minus 28. So 9 minus 28 is going to be negative 19. So that tells us we're going to end up with two imaginary solutions. So now they want us to solve the equation. So we already started solving it, right? Remember, the formula is opposite of b plus or minus b squared minus 4ac over 2a. This is our discriminant part. And so now the opposite of b would be negative 3 plus or minus. We do not have to do this part again. We just calculated it. We know that's negative 19. And so we put that over 2 times 1 as such. And so when we calculate this in this perspective, right, we don't know the square root of 19, but we do know the square root of negative 1. And so we put negative 3 plus or minus I over the square root of 19, and that's over 2. And that would be our final result. If you wanted to write it in any other simplified version, you could do this. You could say negative 3 over 2, and then you can write plus or minus I square roots of 19 over 2. But either way that you want to write it is fine. I always stop right here. I don't typically expand it to this, though I will say this is written in the form of a plus or minus bi design. You could put the I behind here if you want to, but I typically leave it in front of the radical just to make sure. But again, that alternative, if you didn't want it in the front, if you wanted to be in the true a plus bi version, you would put that I back here in the back, which is probably the most appropriate way to write it, to be honest with you, and so forth. So the only other thing left in this section is a bunch of exercises to practice. I'm not going to walk you through these. You could try these if you want, but that's really up to you. This is just doing the quadratic formula over and over and over again, and I don't think you need to watch me do it 6 times over again. And so that will be the end of this presentation.